What is going on, guys? We're back with more picks and predictions. I took a couple weeks off of making these breakdown videos, but it's good to be back. We have the UFC going to Vancouver this weekend for a fight night that has, some title implications in the middleweight division between Reinier de Ridder and Brendan Allen. So without further ado, let's jump right into the full card picks and predictions for UFC Vancouver. First fight on the card, we have Melissa Croden versus Tainara Lisboa, and I'm going to slightly lean towards Tainara Lisboa in this fight. That being said, though, this is one that you probably shouldn't be betting on. I definitely won't be betting on this. Lisboa is an ever so slight underdog in this matchup, and I think she is the cleaner striker in a fight that's going to stay on the feet for 3 rounds most likely. But that being said, Croden does have a physicality advantage, and she can definitely push Lisboa up against the fence, hold her there, exploit a lot of clinch situations in this matchup as well. So I'm going to go with Tainara Lisboa slightly to win this on the cards. It definitely goes all 3 rounds, but if Croden comes out here in her UFC debut and just uses that physicality against a girl like Lisboa, that's definitely a path to victory that is available to her. So give me Lisboa. Coming off that knee injury, she's looked kind of like a step behind in that Luciano Santos fight. Maybe she's going to look flat-footed and a step behind in this one too. So for that reason, I'm definitely not going to be playing this, but Lisboa will be the lean. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight up, we got Azamat Bekoev versus Yousri Belgaroui, and I'm going to go with Azamat Bekoev to win this one. One thing you're going to hear a lot in the build-up to this fight is that Yousri, a former kickboxer, does have a win over Alex Pereira in kickboxing. That being said, though, this is MMA. Bekoev is definitely the more complete fighter, the more well-rounded fighter. He will have the grappling, the wrestling available to him in this matchup. And Bekoev overall is just an absolute dog. He does carry insane power as well. Similar to Yousri, Yousri is obviously going to be dangerous on the feet in this matchup, but I think Bekoev just has more paths to victory here. We're going to see him implement that wrestling. He's looked really solid in his UFC performances so far. He's coming off, 2 round 1 knockouts in the UFC over Zach Reese and Ryan Loder. Now, going up against Yousri, obviously the takedowns is going to be something important. Belgaroui does have decent takedown defense, but overall, I think that, the threat of the wrestling is going to open up spots for Bekoev on the feet. Bekoev does have big power too. He does throw that overhand really strong. And then on top of that, I do see Azamat getting takedowns as needed. So give me Azamat Bekoev to win this one. I think he's the real deal. Yousri, really talented striker. And maybe if he gets a matchup later down the line against someone that doesn't have as much of a wrestling threat, we can play Yousri pretty heavy. But give me Bekoev to win this one. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next up, we got Stephanie Luciano versus Ravena Oliveira. And I'm going to go with Luciano to win this one. I think she is a really talented fighter. She's a great striker, and she strikes really well on both the front foot and the back foot, which is something I really like about her. So she can strike well moving backwards. She's coming off that split decision loss to Sam Hughes, and I think Sam Hughes is actually a really good gauge of where a fighter's at. Her forward pressure, she's just very tenacious, tons of wrestling, tons of takedowns, and that gave Luciano some problems in that last outing, but I think that's something she can really build on against this fight versus Ravena Oliveira, and I think that Ravena Oliveira won't pose as much of a threat. While she will be shooting takedowns on Luciano, that's for sure. I think that Luciano can keep this fight upright. I think she can do all the damage here. I see this one going all the way as well. While Luciano, is a really talented striker, she doesn't really bring, a lot of finishing threat to the fight. So give me Luciano to get this one done on the cards. I think she, defends enough takedowns, keeps the fight standing for long enough. I like this spot for her. The line is getting a little bit wide, but in general, I think she should be safe to parlay. So I got Luciano getting this one done on the cards. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next matchup, we have Kyle Prepolec versus Drew Dober, and I'm going to go with Drew Dober to win this one. That being said, he is a minus 500 favorite going into this fight, and in 2025, I'm not paying that price tag for Drew Dober. At this point, we don't know where his chin is at. His last fight against Manuel Torres, he was really just kind of gone after he got knocked out. He didn't even know that the fight ended, so his chin could be completely shot at this point. Someone like Kyle could come in here, plus 350, big underdog at home in Canada, and just kind of take advantage of what could be a super undurable fighter at this point in his career. So I'm going to go with Drew Dober. He is the better fighter skill-wise. He should be able to, strike with Kyle for 3 rounds and just win that fight straight up. But that being said, Kyle could just be the more durable fighter here, and there could be some issues with Dober's durability that I'm not willing to pay minus 500 for. So Dober's going to be the pick, but like I said, too expensive. Probably shouldn't be betting on this one outside of some props. Next fight on the card, we have Danny Barlow versus Jourdain Santos, and I'm going to go with Danny Barlow to win this one. But once again, this is a fight that, Danny Barlow at minus 300, I think it might be a little bit too wide for me. I did bet on Sam Patterson to beat Barlow in his last fight where he did get knocked out by Sam Patterson. I just think that, some of the fights for Danny Barlow just aren't aging too well. Obviously, the Sam Patterson loss is aging well because Sam Patterson is a very talented fighter. But, Nikolai Veretennikov's split decision, looking back on that today, Nikolai Veretennikov, not the best fighter. He just got dominated by Soriano. Prior to that, he had, a close fight with Prado that he did win. Before that, he got dominated by Austin Vanderford. So, in general, Veretennikov, not the best fighter. Split decision in that fight. And to be honest, that fight could have gone either way. Barlow could have lost that. And then before that, he does knock out Josh Kinlan in the third round, but that fight was a war. And Josh Kinlan is just not UFC level in general. So Danny Barlow, he hasn't looked amazing, in my opinion. A lot of these fights have not aged well for him. And then Jordan Santos, he hasn't shown much either. Lost his UFC debut against Ozzy Diaz. And, Ozzy Diaz is like, he's not super trash, but he's not the best fighter in his own right. I'm going to lean Danny Barlow because he is going up a weight class here, so he does have the lighter man skill at play. On top of that, he is going to be the quicker striker, so he has some of a speed advantage going into this one. But if Jordan Santos, bites down, walks forward, and just kind of bullies Barlow around, I think that is a path. So if Danny Barlow is on the back foot a lot in this fight, I think I would be worried if I was betting on Danny Barlow. So far, I haven't played this. Once again, might be a fight that only a prop might make sense. But, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you guys might be parlaying Danny Barlow this weekend. Good luck to you guys. I do think he should get it done. I'm going to pick him to win. But at the same time, like I said, if I'm watching this fight and he's on the back foot for a lot of it, I think Santos can really build momentum. But Barlow should be quick, should be able to kind of, outwork Santos, have some good footwork underneath him, move forward for a good amount of the fight. So I'm going to go with Barlow. But like I said, there's some questions I have on him. And there's some fights of his that aren't aging too well that I'm, going to be a little bit cautious about. Up next, we got Bruno Silva versus Hyun Park. And this is one of those fights where, Hyun Park's line does look fairly attractive. I'm going to pick Hyun Park to beat Bruno Silva. I think that Bruno Silva, his best days are behind him. His couple losses that he has faced, in the last 9 months or so have been against really high-level competition, probably the best strikers in the division between Manel Kopp and Joshua Van. So I wouldn't really put too much stock into those losses, but at the end of the day, did get finished at the end of both of those fights. Hyun Park also does have the threat of wrestling here. He can, shoot in for some takedowns. On top of that, I don't think he's going to be fully out of the water in the striking. I mean, we've already kind of proven that while Bruno Silva is a good striker, there is levels to the striking, even in the flyweight division here, with people like Manel Kopp, Joshua Van, probably even like a Brandon Royval would kind of starch Bruno Silva just on the feet. So I think that Hyun Park striking, is fairly technical, is fairly clean. He should be able to keep up with Bruno Silva there. He can also mix in the wrestling. That should also open up different opportunities on the feet for him as well. So I'm going to go with Hyun Park here. I haven't played it yet. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. Haven't made a decision on it, but I'm going to pick Park to win. This is one that I like a little bit more than some of the other wider favorites on the card, but I'm going to go with Hyun Park to beat Bruno Silva. Like I said, haven't played it yet, but, we'll see. And let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Charles Jourdain versus Davey Grant. And Davey Grant is one of those fighters that he's going to get a lot of love when he's at plus money odds, especially against a fighter that doesn't provide, like a very clear path to victory against Davey Grant. And, I bet on Davey Grant to beat Damon Blackshear as a big underdog in his last fight, so I might be biased here, but I'm going to go with Davey Grant once again. He is an underdog here once again against the Charles Jourdain. And, both these guys are pretty interesting fighters. Charles Jourdain has really sneaky, really good submissions, but something I wouldn't be too worried about in this matchup because we just saw Davey Grant, get taken down, get controlled, get his back taken by Damon Blackshear, who's very dangerous in that position, and, was able to fight off all the submission attempts, hold off till the end of the round, and, update his game plan going into that second round. So we saw Davey Grant do all of that in his last fight, drops the first round, fairly dominantly against Damon Blackshear, where he just kind of got controlled the entire time, and then goes into the second and third, stuffs every single takedown, pieces up Blackshear on the feet. And, obviously Charles Jourdain, I think, provides more to offer on the feet than a Damon Blackshear, but there are things on the Charles Jourdain side. One, he doesn't really have that much power. He's coming to this with, somewhat of pillow hands. Like I said, the sneaky submissions is something I'm not as worried about because we saw Davey Grant's submission defense. We also know that, Jourdain doesn't shoot the best takedowns. So if he does pull off a submission, it's going to be him jumping a ghillie or something like that. And I think that Grant should be fairly aware of that. So what I really see happening here is, a 3-round striking match. And, in that 3-round striking match, I don't think either of these guys put the other one away. There shouldn't really be some crazy knockout happening here. I think it goes to the cards. I think Davey Grant is just someone that he's good at managing rounds on the feet. I think he can kind of just outwork Jourdain here. And I also think that Jourdain, while he might start fast, I think that Grant definitely builds in his fight. So I see Grant kind of, getting better as this fight goes on and Jourdain slowing down. I think that's going to be something that looks good in the eyes of the judges. So I'm going to go with Grant to win this one, 29-28 decision. Maybe you want to take the spread on Grant. I think that is a pretty decent bet, but I like Grant straight up. I'm going to take him as a dog. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight on the card, we have Kyle Nelson versus Matt Frevola. And I'm going to go with Kyle Nelson to win this one. But overall, I think that this fight is as coin flip as it gets. This is essentially like playing a hand of blackjack. So if you are betting on this fight, very degen. I don't know why you could have any serious conviction in any of these fighters going into this. But I'm going with Kyle Nelson here. I'm going to give him a little bit of an advantage. Being at home in Canada, I'm going to lean his way because of that. I also think that, Matt Frevola, his style of fighting where he just kind of crashes in like a train, I think that's kind of cost him. I don't think he has a chin to kind of uphold that type of fight style. And Kyle Nelson, I think it's a slightly more technical striker. I think Frevola is a bit more dangerous, but at the same time, I think durability-wise, Nelson has what it takes to kind of put Frevola away with Frevola's durability. So I'm going to go with Kyle Nelson. I think that if Frevola crashes in, Nelson is cleaner. He's more technical. He'll land that shot first. On top of that, like I said, I'll lean a little bit his way for the hometown advantage. Don't normally take that into consideration as much, but if it's as coin flip as it gets, you got to pull out something here. So I'm going to go with Kyle Nelson to be, the slightly more technical striker. I think he does find a finish. I think even if Nelson loses here, he probably gets finished by Matt Frevola. So I'm going to go with Nelson by finish, but I think this is, as toss-up as it gets. Probably should not be betting this one whatsoever. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next up, we got Cody Gibson versus Aoriqileng, and I'm going to go with Cody Gibson here, but to be fair, this is one of those fights that I couldn't care less about going into this matchup. Cody Gibson's 38 years old. Aoriqileng coming off, a loss to Raul Rosas Jr. over a year ago. Both these guys kind of don't really mean much to their divisions. I think, it's a cool fight, but couldn't really care less what happens in this one. I don't know why it's at this point in the card. So far, it seems to be on the main card, but I don't understand why. I think there's some better prelims you could probably even move up here, like the Bekoev fight, for example. But I'm going to go with Cody Gibson here. I think that, he has the takedowns to his disposal against Aoriqileng here, who, doesn't have the best takedown defense. Striking-wise, I think fairly similar. I would say Lang in like a firefight, you kind of lean his way. He just poses a bit more danger. He's a bit more unorthodox, throws a little bit more. So that's one thing to note. But overall, if Gibson just kind of shoots some takedowns here, wrestles, goes for his double paycheck, I think he can get it done. I'm going to lean Cody Gibson. Don't care to bet on this one. I think, the odds are cool, but still, just don't care to bet on this one because I don't know how either of these guys are kind of approaching their career at this point. Gibson, 38. He could just come in here looking for a bonus, looking to just kind of wing shots, not really care. Aoriqileng, coming off a whole year layoff. I don't know what he's going to look like. So lean Cody Gibson. Don't really care about this fight. Let's move on to the next one. Up next, we got Manon Fiorot versus Jasmine Jasudavicius. And this is a fight where, I'm going to go ahead and pick Manon Fiorot. But, the more I watch Jasmine's tape, she's obviously a very talented fighter. And, she's a fight finisher, which is something you don't see as much in the women's divisions. You don't really see pure fight finishers. But Jasudavicius is a fight finisher. She has nasty ground and pound. She gets you on the ground. She really looks to put you away. Something I like about Jasmine. But Manon Fiorot, I think she's super skilled. She's coming off that loss to Valentina Shevchenko, but I think that, in a rematch, she could have had her figured out kind of later on in that fight. So I'm going to go with Fiorot. I think that, Jasudavicius, she's going to want to get takedowns. Obviously, in the striking, it's not going to be close. Fiorot is a much better striker. She also stands in that bladed stance with those side kicks. And, while that does kind of leave her open to potentially single legs, I think it does give her a really good balance on that back foot. She can always get to the fence on a takedown attempt. And I just think that she stuffs the takedowns here. I don't see Fiorot just kind of getting manhandled onto the ground. If she does, it'll be a cool moment for Jasmine. Jasmine will really be kind of ready for that title shot if she can come in here and ragdoll someone like Manon. I just don't see Manon Fiorot getting ragdolled. I think that, she keeps this fight standing. I think in space, she is a very, very clean striker, much better than Jasmine. So I'm going to go with Manon Fiorot to win this one. I think that, the line is fairly attractive for a Manon Fiorot going into this fight. But a Jasmine Jasudavicius is just someone that, when you watch her tape, it's a little bit fearful, but I just don't see her kind of ragdolling Manon here. So I'm going to go with Manon to win this one. Haven't played it yet, might play it. there's a good chance I end up kind of playing something along the lines of this fight, but she's going to be the pick. Let's move on to the next fight. Up next, we got Marlon Chito Vera versus Ayman Zahabi, and I feel really strongly about this fight. I'm thinking Ayman Zahabi is, one of the fighters I'm most confident in winning a fight against Marlon Chito Vera, and it's just the fact that, like, bro, Chito Vera hasn't looked dangerous in a very long time. And, Chito Vera coming off 2 straight losses to Sean O'Malley, where he just got absolutely dominated, beautiful performance by Sean O'Malley, proved that there's really levels to the striking. And then coming off that loss to Davison Figueiredo, which, looked pretty similar to that Montel Jackson fight Figueiredo just had, where Figueiredo, got a couple takedowns in rounds 1 and 2, was able to kind of sneak those rounds out, put them in his back pocket, and then just kind of coast later on in that fight, dropping that third. But in general, like, Chito Vera, 2 losses, Davison Figueiredo, Sean O'Malley. Prior to that, beats a Pedro Munoz. And, his fight against Pedro Munoz wasn't even as dominant as Ayman Zahabi's win against Pedro Munoz. So I just think that, Ayman Zahabi in this fight, he's going to throw much more volume. He's going to throw that jab out, pump it out. He's coming from that TriStar gym. They know how to win rounds there. They understand the fight game. They know how to pick shit up. So Ayman Zahabi, he's going to pump that jab out. He's going to be up in these rounds. Chito Vera is going to be waiting. And, he doesn't have a death touch like that. And it's not like Zahabi is super chinny where we have to worry about, Chito just kind of touching him and knock him out. Obviously, if Chito does knock him out, that's going to be his path to victory. But I just don't see Ayman Zahabi coming out here and just, getting knocked out. He's coming off that win over Jose Aldo. And, obviously, I think, Aldo probably could have won that fight. But, it shows that Ayman Zahabi is tough. He understands where he is in the fight. He understands what he has to do to get back into the fight. And I think that in this matchup against Vera, he's going to come out and take the lead early. He's going to pocket rounds 1 and 2. And, Vera's going to really be fighting from behind. And I think that that's going to be a real good spot. You kind of get Ayman Zahabi here almost at pick 'em money. He's going into that third round as like a minus 800 because he pocketed the first 2 and he's just got to survive now. I think that's the scenario we're going to be in. And, maybe he does go ahead and just drop that third. Maybe Chito kind of picks up the pace on him. But in general, Zahabi, crisp boxing, good defense. He'll pump that jab out and he's going to put Vera on the back foot. And Vera's not going to be able to keep up with the volume of Zahabi, where it's just going to come down to the fact that, he's going to know he's behind and there's not really much he's going to be able to do about it. So I like Ayman Zahabi a lot. I think he's kind of a lock on this card. I'm definitely putting a shit ton of money on Ayman Zahabi. That's just how I feel. Feel very strongly about the way this fight's going to play out. Let's move on to the co-main event. The co-main event, we have Kevin Holland versus Mike Malott. And I'm going with Mike Malott to beat Kevin Holland, man. You just can't trust Kevin Holland. It's 2025. He's coming off that loss to Daniel Rodriguez, dude. He should definitely have beaten Daniel Rodriguez. Prior to that, has an absolute dominant performance over Vicente Luque. Has, a decent performance over Gunnar Nelson, but come on, who the fuck is Gunnar Nelson? And then, he has a loss to RDR, has a loss to Dolidze. I don't know, bro. I just think that, Kevin Holland, you just can't take him seriously. Mike Malott, on the other hand, is a fighter you can take seriously. He's on his way to, beating Neil Magny. That was a little bit of a hiccup in his career. And then after that, he got back on track with the Trevin Giles win. Then he goes, puts Charles Radke away very, very dominantly. And now he's going up against Kevin Holland. I just think that, Mike Malott, much more serious in his MMA career. He's got to be the pick here. In his hometown as well. He is fighting in Canada, or home country, I should say. And I also think that, Mallott's counter-striking is really good. And I see him as someone that's not going to take risks, especially against a fighter like Kevin Holland, who is going to do something dumb himself. Holland's not the type of fighter to just kind of stand there and see what happens. You don't have to bring the fight to Holland. If you just kind of stand there, Holland will just come in and try to fight you. So Malott can sit on the counter-striking. He can wait for Holland to make a mistake. Holland, who probably just doesn't care too much, is going to make a mistake. And, I think Malott probably puts him out. So I got Malott by finish here. I think he gets it done. I think Holland is someone that you can always fade confidently because he's just not going to try. So that's something to note. But give me Mike Malott by finish. Let's move on to the main event. In the main event, we have RDR versus Brendan Allen. This was initially supposed to be RDR versus Fluffy. Obviously, Fluffy did get injured, so Brendan Allen did step in. And I'm going to go with RDR to win this one. I think that this is kind of an easier matchup than a Robert Whittaker was for an RDR. I think that RDR can impose his will against a Brendan Allen. I think that Allen is talented enough in the grappling to survive any, submission threats and things like that. But overall, I do see him losing the positional battle to RDR. The way RDR just kind of imposes his physicality and fights is next to nobody in the UFC. Is very good at doing that. I think over 5 rounds, he's going to wear on Brendan Allen. I think that, on the feet, Brendan Allen might be, the better striker, but I think RDR is unorthodox enough to keep Brendan Allen guessing. So I'm going to go with RDR to win this one on the cards. I know it's plus money for this fight to go all the way, but I think that, RDR, well, he may find a knockout out of nowhere, but I think that Brendan Allen is strong enough to kind of, stay away from any submission threats. The knockout, I think, is just kind of luck here or there. Overall, I see it going all the way. I think RDR just kind of wins this one on the cards. Wears Brendan Allen down, uses that grappling of his, uses that physicality of his to get this one done. So give me RDR to get this one done. I think that, he should fight next for the belt against Chimaev. That's just my opinion. And that does it for all the picks and predictions for UFC Vancouver. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you did like the picks and the breakdowns, drop a like, share it with your friends, drop a comment as well. Let me know who you're tailing, who you think you're going to fade me on. And yeah, I'd like to be more consistent with these picks and predictions videos. We were gone for a couple weeks, but moving forward, we'll definitely be here every single week, giving you guys my breakdown of the card. So let me know if you guys like it. Also, I'd love to expand into, more commentary style content around MMA and the UFC, drop my opinions on different things that are happening, trending within the space. So if there's something you'd like me to talk about, anything that's happening within MMA that you'd like my opinion on, drop it in the comments and, I'll take that into consideration for the next commentary video I want to make. And yeah, thank you guys for tuning in once again. Good luck to everyone at UFC Vancouver. I will see you guys next week.